Hello, welcome to session of Development Study Group. The Development Study Group is it's an independent initiative of students of Faculty of Economics, Southeast University. We try to engage with critical theory and topics which are usually not included in the context of classroom. So, and DSG Research Forum is a place where young scholars, we try to engage with young scholars and research ideas and etc. So today we have Madhuvadhani. She will be presenting her work on home as a site of production. So welcome to all. Welcome.
Hello everyone. I'm Madhuvadhani. I'm from the Department of Sociology and I'm doing my PhD second year. So yeah, today I'll be having a conversation on the topic accumulation of capital and locus of oppression, home as a site of production in the lens of social reproduction theory. So let's start with having a discussion on what is home. So home is a space that is perceived in different sense by different sets of people. So for few, home is a space of emotion, and for few, home is a space for personal relationships, and for few, home is a site of resistance. So in this paper, I view home as a site of production, which is very crucial for the maintenance of a capitalistic structure. So what is home-based work then? So home-based work is like where you produce an entire commodity, or when you produce or add value to a part of the commodity which goes for sale into the market. So based on this explanation, there are two kinds of home-based workers. So first, it is self-employed home-based workers, and the second, it is dependent home-based workers. Who are self-employed home-based workers? Self-employed home-based workers are those who procure raw materials from the market, make the entire commodity within home and sell it in the market. The second category is the dependent home-based workers, who they get either raw material or a semi-finished commodity from the owner of a firm. They add value to that commodity, which goes back to the hands of the capitalist or the owner for sale. What is social reproduction theory then? So social reproduction theory tries to answer an interesting question, that is, if the worker is the one who produces all the commodities, then who produces the worker? So SRT answers that it is the labor of the woman that forms the basis for the maintenance of a capitalist society, because a woman is the one who produces the future workers, and a woman's labor will provide for the food, shelter, like emotional well-being, all these things for a future worker, so that they can go and work for a capitalist that maintains the structure. Yeah. So is home the newly emerged location of production? Should we view home only as a site that reproduces labor power for the maintenance of capitalist society? What if our living room becomes a factory? So this paper attempts to critically analyze home as a site of production, that with a specific emphasis on home-based work, and that is very essential for this global capital economic order. So by emphasizing home only as a space that reproduces labor power, social reproduction theory actually misses out a key insight that is given by Marxist feminism, ignoring the other aspects of production that happens within home. So in this case of home-based work, home and workplace both converge together. So the process of production is synchronized with the reproduction of life. Kalyan Sanyal and Rajesh Bhattacharya, in their work, they say that in the key feature of an informal economy is the inseparability between production and reproduction. To simplify it, for example, imagine a person who is doing embroidery for a shirt piece. Do you think their work starts from 9 and ends at 4? It's not a regular time period that they have. They'll start their work at 9, perform for 40-45 minutes, go back to their kitchen, do the cooking, come back, do the same embroidery again, and then they will go back to their, wash clothes, dry it, come back, do this work, and they'll again go wash the vessels, come back again. So there is no specific time period that they allot for any work. So that is paid work as well as this unpaid domestic work happening together at the same time. So that is why they say that there exists an inseparability between production as well as reproduction when it comes to this informal economy. So in this paper, what I attempt to analyze is having a geographical understanding of the spatial organization of capital. Like when it comes to home-based work, the main locus of analysis is actually home. So try to analyze how capital organizes production and reproduction in a woman worker's daily life. So I organized this paper into 5 headings. So first we'll be dealing with the conceptual framework, that is home as a site of production. And then the inseparability between production and social reproduction within home. And then the how do you make meaning of what is home-based work. And then how capitalism is organized in a gendered way to exploit the labor of women. And then a value theory of inclusion and conclusion. So, yeah, moving on to the conceptual framework, home as a site of production. I would like to start with a critique on Kalyan Sanyal's work. So, Kalyan Sanyal and Rajesh Bhattacharya in their work, they states that we do not deny other locations of labor that are emerging. The home workers in the putting out system, for example. So, critically analyzing the statement, Kalyan Sanyal and Rajesh Bhattacharya states that home is a newly emerging or emerging location of labor. Is it really so? No, it's not, because home-based work is not a contemporary phenomenon. Home-based work has existed throughout the history. Only after industrialization, home and workplace got separated, because only after industrialization, industry emerged as a separate place to work. But before industrialization, home was actually the workplace. And during the post-industrial era, which is now, the capital is now again returning back to home so that they can utilize the cheap available labor force, that is women. In this context, I would like to quote an ethnographic study on Kashmiri shawl industry by Millie Bush. She cites Mushtaq's study, where they talk about men's labor being recognized. Men are recognized as weavers, and they perform the weaving and spinning task, and they are paid. But on the other hand, the Muslim women, they perform the role, all the behind the scene tasks, including preparing the raw materials, but their work has always remained hidden. So through this, during that familial division of labor itself, exploiting the labor of women has started. So yeah, through this pre-industrial study, we can actually confirm that what Kalyan Sanyal stated. I am refuting this opinion that home is not the newly emerged location of labor, but emerged location of labor. Yeah. So, but the real issue arises when T.K. Bhattacharya states social reproduction, in her work, Social Reproduction Theory, she states, one way of resolving this problem is through a spatial understanding that there are two separate but conjoined spaces. So, in this context of home-based work, when you're looking at it, how can you separate a space for production and a space for reproduction? Because both exist in the same space itself. So through this question, we enter the next part, that is the inseparability between production and social reproduction. Different people will have different perception towards a particular place. For example, a capitalist will view a particular place as to generate profit, but on the other hand, for a worker, he or she will perceive the same place where they socialize as fellow human beings. This space is nothing but home. So that is why politics of location actually matters. So in this phase of home, there exists a combination of both unpaid as well as paid work that takes place. And capitalism states that through home-based work, they actually offer a more personalized form of work relations. What do they mean by personalized form of work relations? The capitalism states that through home-based work, we actually allow women to perform their homely role, that is, to fulfill all the domestic responsibilities that they are supposed to do. But on the other hand, do we really they make the women juggle between this paid labor as well as unpaid labor? Is it really a flexible form of or personalized form of work relations? No, it is not, because through this you can colonize the entire lifetime of a woman, that where your life is work and work becomes life. Through this statement, we enter the next section. Then, what is work? What do you mean by work? So, then in this section, actually, the industrial home-based work is actually productive and it exists within the home. So, and you retain a particular labor force within home so that they perform the unpaid domestic work also for you. So, Leach also critiques that the existing analytical tools are actually insufficient to theorize what is home-based work. So, for example, there exists a narrow conceptualization of what is work. We can't conceptualize what is work even till now. So, this narrow conceptualization of what is meant by work is taken advantageous by a capitalist so that they can extract profit. For example, it will appear that a worker is paid for an entire day, but they are paid only a part of it and the rest is appropriated by the capitalist as profit. And here, the capitalists actually find home-based work as a perfect way to extract profit and exploit the labor of women. So in this case of home-based work, as there exists no separation between home and workplace, there is no proper meaning of what is home and what is work in home-based work. So it becomes very easy for them to exploit their labor and generate profit. Yeah. So in this global capital circuit, where do you actually position home-based work? In this broad spectrum of this capitalist accumulation, it is very essential to locate home-based work, because locating home-based work will help you in analyzing or understanding the exploitation of home-based workers, and having an understanding of this exploitation process will help us in understanding the process of capital accumulation also. So capitalism as a means of production has always depended on the labor of women. So the capitalist production process will confine women within their homes and exploit their labor through low wages, precarious work, or and other discriminatory practices that exist within. So what makes women an attractive labor force to the capitalist? So in the words of Edison, women were seen as incapable of being the subjects of social revolt because of their lack of direct participation in social production. So under the lens of capitalism, they all the labor of women is actually perceived as some kind of personalized service that should be offered and that is deprived of wages too. So capitalism diminishes the creative capacity of women and make a woman work only for wages. For capitalism to develop, women should be socially confined within their homes. Through home-based work, you can economically confine women within their homes, and this economic confinement of women provides a material basis for the social confinement of women too. So, this confinement, how do we justify this confinement? So, capitalism states that through home-based work, we offer a flexibility to women so that they are allowing them to manage between both unpaid as well as unpaid labor. But on the other hand, this is not real flexibility, and this narrative or myth needs to be critically challenged. Yeah. So then, gendered organization of capital. So global capital has created multiple ways to exploit the feminized labor force or for the accumulation process. Their bodies are actually depleted to generate profit for them. So gender-based power relations are produced, reproduced, and reinforced in this structure. So we need to explore how space and gender are formed and how gendered spaces are reproduced in the everyday lives of women workers. And the dominant patriarchal ideologies will also determine what kind of work a woman should do. So Swati Sachdev, in her study on women home-based workers in ready-made garments industry, states that women are usually employed in works that are highly labor-intensive, that are time-consuming, which are repetitive, monotonous, and assembly-type operations. So, for example, women are restricted only to hand sewing or stitching buttons, sequinning or beading. All these works are just performed by women. So why does it happen actually? Yeah. So Ellison and Pearson, they quote that female labor must either be cheaper to employ than comparable male labor or have higher productivity or some combination of both. The net result being that unit costs of production are lower with female labor. So when Ellison and Pearson, they did a study on analyzing the productivity between men and women labor force. So their study actually stated that there exists not much differentiation in the productivity that is associated with them. Even in some cases, women labor force actually performed a bit more productive when compared to men. So where does this differentiation between the productivity actually originate from? So there exists a firm belief in the innate natural capacity that a person holds. So that leads to the social stereotypes that a man is the primary breadwinner of a family and a woman is not. A woman is always a secondary member who contributes, and a man wages is recognized as primary, and the woman's wages is recognized as pin money that acts as just a mere substitute to their families around. Yeah. So no, but it's not always about the secondary status that is attached to a woman's labor and wages. Sometimes it is also about the subordinate status that is given to the work or paid work that a woman performs. For example, the work that a home based worker do, for example, it may be thread cutting or embroidery or whatever it is, we generally don't attach it a proper work, like there exists nothing called proper work, but a work terminology. And even sometimes they themselves don't identify them as a worker, they just identify themselves as a housewife sometimes. And that leads to a invisibilization of their work even when it comes to census. Wilkinson and Weber, in their ethnographic study in chikan industry in Lucknow, they states that women do embroidery work. So this embroidery work is always given a subordinate status within their families. So for them, a woman's primary responsibility is the domestic work that she is supposed to do, and then only they will rank the productive work that they do. The subcontractors who give this work to them, they actually say that we give this work or outsource this work to women because of the sympathy, that we allow them to earn some mere amount of money while they stay within their homes. So, like, so that they generate some extra amount for their household. And these subcontractors actually don't focus on or invest, they don't actually invest in the workplace, they don't invest in the equipments, they don't invest in anything. So it becomes very easy for them to extract the labor of women home-based workers, as they are not yet collectively organized, as there exists not much unionized voice for them. Yeah. So how have we structured this gender organization of capital? So first, we'll be dealing with oriental docility of the nimble figure, and then devaluation of the skills in the lens of social reproduction theory, and then navigating hope within precarious livelihoods. Yeah. So oriental docility of the nimble figure. So what do we mean by nimble figure? So when there is a highly feminized labor force, capitalists have a lot of advantages, because according to them, women are easily adaptable to hectic work discipline. They are more obedient, they have very less inclination to unionize, and they have less collective bargaining capacity, and along with that they have something called nimble fingers. So what do we mean by nimble fingers? Through nimble fingers you can actually do a work fast, like its nimble fingers are actually suitable for repetitive works, and so they say women and children, they possess nimble fingers. Yeah. So Neeti, in her work, she also states that local labor market is conceptualized as a socio-economic space that is characterized by the unique intersection of labor production, reproduction, and regulation. So nipple fingers of women is not something which you can naturally inherit from your mothers. It is a product of the immense social training that a woman or a girl undergoes since their childhood. For example, learning how to sew or stitch is a part and parcel of some women, like belonging to some communities' everyday life. So when you learn how to stitch within your home, you actually become a potential worker who can stitch in an industry also. When you learn how to cut vegetables in your everyday life or like in your kitchen, you can actually become a home-based worker of a pickle making industry, because there are pickle making industries who will give vegetables like ginger, herb, mango, all these things delivered to your home, where you cut those vegetables and you give it back to them so that they can make pickles. Like the pickle making industry takes care of it. So, do they think that these skills are skills? According to the capitalist viewpoint, these are not skills. This particular labor is categorized as unskilled or semi-skilled because they don't undergo any special training to do this labor. But what do they mean by special training? For example, like computer engineers, doctors, everyone, they undergo a special training. And so their labor is not categorized as unskilled or semi-skilled. Their labor is completely categorized as skilled. But they say that as you don't undergo any special training, I don't have to categorize you as a skilled labor. But what about this like immense training since childhood that they undergo? Can we undermine these things? This is how they undermine, how do these undermining skills play a very big role? As they can undermine these skills as unskilled, it becomes very easy for them to pay you lower wages. And this is not like this is actually an ethnographic study that is made by Needi in Kerala's food processing industry, where the subcontractors say that cutting job is something that comes very naturally to women, and it is not a special skill that they actually possess. Hence, gender becomes one of the major structure of social structure of accumulation for capitalists to exploit this labor of women workers. Yeah. So devaluation of skills in the lens of social reproduction theory. So the paid work actually exists within this domestic sphere. Does it impact the way we perceive home-based work? Actually, it impacts because sometimes home-based work is perceived as an extension of the unpaid task that a woman should do within the home. They say that there exists a constant devaluation and cheapening of women's labor that takes place. Mies also in her work on Lacemakers of Narsapur, she states that the dominant patriarchal ideas actually influence the way we value the labor of a woman. So then, actually, Archana Agrawal, she mentions in her work that there are unskilled labor that can be employed in low-tech industries such as garments, and they regard these works like thread cutting and button stitching as menial tasks. So this raises two questions. So why women are just restricted to thread cutting or button stitching or packaging works? And who determines these labor as skilled or unskilled, and why do they do so? So the skills aspect in home-based work is actually something which is underexplored in the domain, and as skills such as sewing and cutting are not regarded as specialized training. Social reproduction theory can actually expand its domain in concerning this reproduction of labor power. So as these skills are transmitted from generation to generation, these skills are actually taken for granted as domestic skills that are coming naturally to a woman. Yeah. Alessandra Masadri, she did a ethnographic study on garment sector in Delhi. So where she talks about the embroidery work that usually takes place. So in that study, she mentions that the Delhi exporters, they rely a lot on the embroidery work, because after embroidery, you add extreme level of value to a particular commodity. So for example, a kurti will be like 75 rupees just. But when you do an embroidery, the value of the kurti will become like 125 or 130 rupees. So the embroidery work can actually make a very big difference to the value that a commodity holds. This embroidery work usually takes place outside the factory. So it is in Uttar Pradesh, Bareilly region, this work is actually a lot performed by Muslim women. So the embroidery work actually functions in a family-based setup where men manage the whole unit, and they will allocate works to the wife and children. That they will be allocating the works to their wife and children, and they will be performing the task. So through employing your own family members, you actually cut down the production cost, and this embroidery work is not actually treated as a skill because it becomes a part of their community tradition. So when something becomes a part of your community tradition, the women are expected to know these works, and so it is not regarded as a skill that a woman possesses. And as I already mentioned, that this embroidery work actually adds a lot of value to that commodity. The entire value is not at all enjoyed by the worker who actually adds value to that particular commodity, because the entire value that is added through this work will go to the hands of a capitalist. So actually, the scope of social reproduction theory in this reproduction of labor power for capitalist production needs to be expanded. Apart from providing food, apart from providing shelter and reproduction, you can the theory can talk about the skill transmission for the economic production within the space of home. Yeah. So the last heading is navigating hope within precarious livelihoods. So through this neoliberal model that is promoted through this globalization, you actually transfer all the risk and the uncertainties to the workers. So this transferring risk and uncertainty to the workers leads to the creation of a separate class called precariat. So what do they mean by precariat? Who are these precariat and what makes them precariat? So precariat is nothing but precarious plus proletariat. Precarious means something that is always uncertain. There is nothing called steady. And proletariat, as we all know, is worker. So home-based work is actually a very great example of precarious labor because it is characterized by precarious labor. You don't have any certainty on working hours. You don't know what are the hours that you will work. You don't know when you will get the orders. You don't know what will be your wages. So that, and you don't know whether you will be having work today or tomorrow, whatever it is. You don't know anything. So home-based workers actually suffer from the uncertainty when with regards to receiving orders from the subcontractors and regular supply or like regular wages, all these things, it happens. So as I already talked about the Kerala food processing industry, they say that when there is a peak season, women tend to earn 7,000 or 8,000 rupees per week. But when there is no season, their wages drop to 70 to 80 rupees per week. So the major implication of this is they can't rely on just one work, that is home-based work. This makes them juggle between performing one or two paid work at the same time in combination with the unpaid work that they perform within the home too. And apart from all these uncertainties that is associated with home-based work, it is an interesting question to ask. Despite all these problems and exploitation in home-based work, what makes women still perform this work? So what hope do they have in this home-based work that makes them believe that it will lead to some kind of economic or social mobility in their life? It's an interesting question to ask. So yeah, then a proposed kind of not a solution but just a theoretical expansion that gives. So there needs to be a value theory of evolution. So as there exists an inseparability and entangled production and reproduction, you have to recognize the multiple forms of exploitation that takes place within the space of home to home-based work. For example, you will be exploited in your paid labor as well as in your unpaid labor. So first thing that you can do is recognize all forms of exploitation that is taking place. So like when you are analyzing the exploitation, first try to understand the local historical cultural context, because only when you analyze that you can understand how work is organized and how a worker experiences work with regards to a particular ground. Often home-based work is treated as a residue of pre-industrial stuff. Like people stated that home-based work will deteriorate once capitalism attains its peak. But on the other hand, home-based work still thrives in this society. So home-based workers are actually one of the most complex adaptive figures that who are challenging this dominant productivist notions of what is value, what is work, who is a worker, what is a workplace. So all these notions are actually challenged by the existence of a home-based worker. Yeah. So in the concluding part, what I want to talk is, in this capitalist regime, we all talk about the exploitation that is taking place. So with regards to the locus of analysis, the exploitation doesn't always take place within the factory gates. Sometimes the exploitation will also take place outside the factory gates, that is home. We all want a revolution against this capitalist regime. So the heroes who are going to fight in this revolution against capitalist regime is not always the workers who are working within the factory gates. Sometimes it is also the labor of women who are laboring in their home just to survive in this era.
Thank you, Madhu. Like, we have a Q&A session. Like, if you have questions, comments, then we have a couple of questions from online also. Like,
we have a question from Tathagat on the chat. If everything immediately becomes capitalistic production everywhere, then this also implies a heterogeneity of resistance to the reactive force of capital. How do you think one can organize along this heterogeneity to confront when the enemy might be common, but not immediately or directly so?
Yeah, that is true, because last time when Vedant was also talking about, we actually met with this concept like heterogeneous and resistance. So yeah, when looking at the unionization part, now unions actually, there are a lot of unions even my field is actually Tirupur. I recently did a pilot study there. So there are a lot of unions that is working for the factory workers, but now only their focus actually shifted to home-based workers. So now they are like struggling a lot to organize the home-based workers because space becomes a very big barrier to organize them. For like home-based work, the main characteristic is the anonymity. You don't know who is your fellow worker. You just know 4 to 5 people who work within your who work within your neighborhood, but you don't know who is the other fellow worker who is going to work with you. So there exists a heterogeneity obviously because each and every one of the workers who are working under this capitalist regime experience a different form of exploitation. Everyone faces exploitation, but the forms of exploitation actually differs. So we need to like theoretically first expand through practical experience to take into account different forms of exploitation.
I just wanted to have a thought on it, but assuming that the capital structure sort of tries to imply that home-based work is a sort of a negotiating process that you don't necessarily have to figure out between care and employment, right? You can still engage in work within the home itself, and assuming that the characteristic approach doesn't work in recognizing its favor in the long run. I just wanted to know your thought opinion on how would one approach the concept of care in that sense.
So CAD is something that is dealt a lot in SRT, like social reproduction theory. So that is actually the criticism that I put forward in SRT actually. So SRT states that SRT actually talks a lot about the scare economy. That is how a woman's labor is so much required in the scare economy to actually make a worker produce and make them sustain also by providing food, by providing shelter, whatever emotional aspects that you are required to put for the sustenance of a worker. You actually do it so that they go and work for a capitalist. So this is what the major focus of care economy lies on. But I want to expand it further because this is not the only way that a woman's labor is sustaining a worker for a capitalist. Sometimes the transmission of skills that also happens as I was saying, stitching or cutting vegetables. So all these things are part of the social reproduction. But SRT actually don't deal with it or have like underexplored a bit. So the care needs to be expanded a bit.
Alright, so thank you for the presentation. So like you are talking that there are no presently there is no statistics with regards to home-based workers. So are there any attempts officially from the government or any particular agency to expand these numbers? Basically, how many are there? What are the numbers of home-based workers? How many are involved or something like that? Also, you're talking about you have identified your field. So in that sense, how did you identify your field? Because you are also telling that they themselves don't identify as workers. So how did you identify your field? And are there any attempts by government in terms of quantifying the number of home-based workers?
So in Indian like data, it's very difficult to. There exists no such reliable source or like authentic source where you can have the exact number of home-based workers because it's completely invisibilized. So, but on the other hand, like you have data from UN, so UN actually gives some level, and ILO also quotes, but that is a macro level data. They just quote like like 10 million home-based workers exist worldwide, but they don't give a proper categorization.
Just a follow-up question. Presently we have this category called self-employed. So does government identify self-employed on parallel terms with home-based workers?
Yeah. So self-employed is not actually that I am dealing with. I am dealing with dependent home-based workers. So you can actually categorize self-employed because they produce the entire commodity and sell it in the market, and entire profit actually comes to them. But on the other hand, I am dealing with dependent home-based workers. They don't have any ownership over the commodity that they add value to, and they are still not yet part of this official statistics.
Second, how did you identify field? For example, they on themselves.
So My field is actually Tirupur. It's a city it's a district in Tamil Nadu. So I'm looking at the thread cutters or trimmers. So that is my workers that I'm going to deal with. Their work, like they'll get a garment piece, they have to cut the extra threads, check for the mistakes, check for the labels, categorize them according to the sizes. That is what they do. So I identified my field because I was also a home-based worker during my childhood. So and as that is the city I have been grown up since my childhood, so I know the home-based work actually exists in those particular areas where there are a lot of garments industry. So when there are a lot of migrant households and Dalit households, that is why you find a lot of home-based workers being inside, and because they are more vulnerable, so the capitalists try to make use of this caste and gender also and migrant status also to exploit their income. So it's very easy, right? One more question. Do you think that in order to make your argument more effective, one also needs to think of value production as something beyond what is physical, tangible, quantifiable, doesn't one's whole being also become subsumed in this framework as being the active side of capitalist exploitation? Yeah. So actually, we still now don't have a concrete definition of what is value or what is worth. We don't have anything called concrete definition. So, for example, when I went to my field, like I was listening to the narratives that was happening. So, you have to listen to their conversation. So, at that time they were explaining, like, their conversation mostly revolved around cooking. So, they were telling, like, what to ask care economy. So, they say that you have to actually quantify the labor that they put into cooking. And you have to account for the labor, like account for the work that they perform. Okay, you will somehow try to find the time, or maybe you can find even some ways to quantify that labor that they put for cooking. But on the other hand, during the conversation, they actually mentioned that I become tired every day when I think of what to cook. So even thinking of what to cook is also a labor, right? So do you think of any way to quantify that effective labor that they put in? So it becomes very difficult to first conceptualize what is labor and what is value. So start from problematizing this. Only when you start problematizing what is value and what is worth, challenge the existing dominant notions. So then you actually expand the domain.
Just had a clarification. When you started, you said that women have always been in home-based work, and then moving on, you said that because of capitalist production has forced women into home-based work. So, which is it? And if you are saying women have always been in home-based work, like what time period are you talking about? Historically.
So first statement what I said was actually right. Women has all, because at that time there existed, like during the pre-industrial era, only after industrialization, there is a separate workplace called factory that is emerged. Before that, you were actually producing within the space of home. There existed nothing called separate workplace, right? So at that time, what existed was family-based division of labor. So the male breadwinner will actually perform this task. Even within the agrarian economy also, there exists a specific task that the woman within the household will be performing. So in that sense, I was saying it's not only agrarian, even like the shawl industry that I was talking about in Kashmir. So men will be performing the weaving, spinning, all these tasks, but women will be, their task mostly will be behind the scene. It's hidden actually. Like they actually prepare the raw materials, they do the embroidery. So all these things was happening at that time. So it was pre-industrial time. So capitalism forces women. It's not like we are forcing you to perform, be stuck it down to home. It's like you want to retain a particular labor force within home so that it performs all the domestic work for you also, right? Because capitalism allows domestic work also to sustain. So there also you require a labor force. So here they find home-based work is like has a economic confinement of women within home. But I'll just give you a myth that I'm flexibilizing your labor. But on the other hand, what's happening is entire colonization of your life.
So I do not belong to the economics background. So what I would be asking is something related to law. So one thing that I could see is the invisibilization of the labor that women are doing. And one of the reasons is because they do not have the collective bargaining power as such. So in this space, the legal regulations are actually absent. There is a void in the legal regulations, right? So in case if the regulations actually fill the void by making, framing laws as such, making the unionization possible and recognizing the labor through the wages, the pay. So do you think there would be a transformation, or do you think the law would also succumb to capitalism in a way that the same situation would be retained?
So actually, law recognizes their labor. It is not like law doesn't. But the real problem is their work in itself is not something a part of any designation. So how do you categorize it? So only when you start categorizing a worker, and then only you can unionize, because law never prohibited unionizing home-based workers. So the existing dominant labor unions, they don't focus on home-based work, because there are a lot of movements in the West who wanted to eliminate home-based work as a whole, because they dilute the essence of a labor union. So according to them, they want to focus only on the workers who are working inside the factory. So they believe that the existence of home-based work is challenging or diluting the labor union that exists. So only when you have a proper clarification, and because law didn't prohibit unions, right? And this is also there, like we need a minimum wage requirement. Home-based work should become a part of this minimum wage requirement, and they should be monitored under law. So that is not there, as law didn't prohibit unions. So that is what something I can expect from law. And yeah, one more thing, like home-based workers, they had a policy, but it has not yet been implemented. So that policy implementation can also make a big difference.
Any more questions, comments?
If you don't have any more questions, we can conclude the session for today. Thank you so much, Madhu, for your talk. And thank you for everyone for coming. Ahead, we have 2 more events, which will be the last of the events for DSG this semester. One is also the theme for this month is meant to be caste. So we have one talk by Professor Tamakna Halkar, teacher at the Cambridge University. That is on residential stratification and how caste and social stratification plays a role in the South Asian nation. And finally, we'll be ending with a reading session on the 20th. We are reading 2 papers, so the primary reading is Ambedkar is a reading by Ambedkar, and the second one is by Satish Deshpande. So we'll be critically analyzing both the readings and trying to understand the formation and where caste originated from and its formation and how that has played a role in India. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you can join us for the next discussion.